everyone, and welcome to the Harrison Bridge Show. Today, we're diving into a very interesting topic. Why do energy salespeople fail, and what you can do about it? We have Tom Mallens with us from Sandler Training. Sandler are global leaders in sales leadership and management training. I personally have been lucky enough to work with Tom, and let me tell you, he has some great principles and ideas. So I've invited him on our show to share his wisdom and experience. Tom, welcome to the show.
Welcome. Good to see you, Lee. Good to see you, Kirsty. Thanks for having me.
Our pleasure. And as usual, we have the delightful Kirsty Ames to MC the show. Hi, Kirsty.
Hi, Lee. Hi, Tom. How are you both doing? Thank you very much. Yes, so as we go through today, if you have any questions for Tom or for Lee, feel free to pop them in the comments and I'll bring them up and get them both to answer. So don't leave me lonely in the comments. Come and talk to me.
Thanks, Kirsty. So, Tom, I've got to tell you, as someone who runs their own business, the one thing that keeps me up at night is sales. You know what Henry Ford said, right? Nothing happens until somebody sells something. But here's the thing, our clients keep telling us how tough it is to find the right people to lead their sales function, and that their salespeople are order takers rather than new business winners. So the big question is, Tom, why is it so hard to find good salespeople or sales leaders, and why do so many of them not make the grade?
That is a good question, Lee. So I look at it in the following way. So think about it like this. We've got a salesperson who is, frankly, desperate for a salary or a bigger salary. They want a job. They've got to keep paying the bills. They want a roof over their head. Then we've usually also got a hiring manager. Could be a business owner, some kind of manager with authority to hire, and they need a vacancy filled. They want someone to come and shoulder the burden of generating sales and doing the dirty work of sales that they don't want to do anymore. So they've got a vacancy they need filling. In essence, we have two desperate people usually meeting up over coffee. And that is a recipe for disaster. So we've got to have a more structured approach. One of the reasons that it is so difficult to find good salespeople is because often bad salespeople look quite a lot like good salespeople on the surface. Many of them appear to be good because, frankly, they've had a lot of practice at interviews. They're just good at interviewing. They've been round and round the industry. They've interviewed at all the big firms. So they're quite good at turning on the charm for 30 minutes, 45 minutes. Most of them can cook up a pretty decent looking CV, which we all know is often a wonderful work of fiction or certainly exaggeration. And then a hiring manager thinks, my God, this person could save me from having to go out and sell anything. Let's give them a job. They did well at their other place, according to their CV and the references from their friends. And then we wonder why a month, 3 months, 6 months later, those sales numbers aren't going up in the way we would like. So that is one of the reasons that it is so hard to find good salespeople. Does that make sense?
It sure does. So the problem is desperation. Two people meeting together, one desperate for a job, one desperate to hire. And I think, as you alluded to there, perhaps interviewing too informally, over coffee, no formal interview process. And actually, I think some CEOs perhaps are some of the worst hiring managers, and they hire people like them, affinity bias, and people can interview really well, but actually that doesn't necessarily make them a good person for the job you're hiring for.
A lot of those interviews, it's way too reliant on gut feel and the assumption that just because someone apparently did well in a previous role or held down a job for a long time, that they're actually good at selling. So we see this all the time where someone works for a bigger competitor or a bigger company in the industry, and then the hiring manager thinks, my God, they must be fantastic. They must be great. They're going to bring in a load of business. When, of course, Those are all just assumptions. There's no testable way of knowing that that's the case. They think that they're going to bring their existing accounts with them, which doesn't often or ever happen. And they assume that just because they appeared to be successful in their last role, that they can actually sell. What we often find is that there was no structured process to their selling activity. So maybe they were just sat on top of a lot of very comfortable accounts, collecting that commission or that sales revenue every month, not really doing that much to get it. But that was just the result of maybe a lot of hard work years and years ago that they're just not willing to do anymore.
Yeah, great point, Tom. And on gut feel, I actually use gut feel to rule people out. And I'm listening to my gut. There's something about this person that's telling me they're not quite right, and it's acting on that. But I use it to rule people out rather than, oh, I really like this person because they're like me. They support the same football team as me. That's not a structured interview process or a good way of interviewing people.
No, absolutely.
Fantastic.
So next question, Tom. What should you have in place to create a high-performing sales function?
So, two things I would suggest for a high-performing sales function. Number one is a clear sales process. And number two is a coherent methodology. So, just to unpack that a little bit, if you asked a pilot or a surgeon or a lawyer, hey, what's your process for flying a plane or doing brain surgery or winning a trial? Hopefully, a good one at least could describe the steps, the actions that they go through, that they take in order to get that end result. If you said to a pilot, hey, what's the process for flying a plane? And they said, well, I just kind of get in the cockpit, really focus on building the relationship, and hopefully we end up at the destination on time. Would you have much faith in their ability? Probably not. So, yeah, exactly. And when you speak to a lot of salespeople and you say, what's your process for closing a deal? What you get is just psychobabble. It's vague. It's wishy-washy. They can't articulate the clear and definitive steps they go through to get the end result that they are looking for. So we've got to have a process. This means clarity on what are the stages and what happens at each stage to end up with either going our separate ways or getting a signed order. We need to know what each of those stages looks like. And then number two, we need a methodology. And the methodology is the guiding principles that determine what we say and do within each step of the process. So the methodology is going to inform us about what questions we ask, what statements we make, and why we say or ask those statements or questions in the way that we do.
Thanks, Tom. So you need to have a sales process and a sales methodology. I really like your analogy about a pilot would have a process to fly a plane. So should sales leaders and their salespeople to sell their product and service. And my view is that in a tough economic climate, if you don't have a sales process or methodology or the right people, you really are in trouble. What about KPIs that are important for companies to have to measure success of the sales function?
Yeah, very good question. So there are two types of KPI that I think we need. And we refer to these as leading and lagging indicators or leading and lagging KPIs. So a lagging KPI is something that really tells us, did we get the intended end result? So this might be a measure of how much revenue someone brought into the company per month or per quarter. It might be number of closed deals, for example. A leading indicator,
the outcome.
Yeah, it's like some measure of the end result. So we know if we're on track, we're fulfilling the overall strategy. A leading indicator is something we can measure that we are either totally or more or less in control of, that gives us an early warning sign of whether we're on track for the end result that we want. So these might be things like number of conversations with on-profile potential customers, or number of face-to-face meetings or online meetings completed every week or every month. So for example, if we're having a lot of conversations with on-profile potential customers and a lot of meetings, all other things being equal, we're going to hit our number at the end of the quarter. A lot of organizations just put too much focus on those lagging indicators. They're always trying to massage the figures. There's nothing they can do about them. We want to be focusing on those leading indicators.
Brilliant. Okay, so leading and lag indicators, and it's actually leading indicators are in some ways more important to focus on, because it's that will hit your end number and the eventual results.
Yes.
Brilliant. Fabulous. Great, Tom. Kirsty, do we have any questions from people in the chat?
We haven't had any so far, but if anybody does want to talk to me or ask a question for Tom and Lee, now is a really good time, because we're about to go on to something that I think most people are really excited about, which I believe is the top tips, Lee.
Yeah, Tom, what are your 3 top tips to building a high-performing team?
So my 3 top tips. Number 1, we got to have a hiring process built around what we call the search criteria. So search stands for skills, experience, attitude, results, cognitive skills, and habits. Most interviews are based on a kind of superficial assessment of whether someone has skills and experience. And they really neglect whether people have the right attitude. Have they generated in the past the end results we're looking for? Do they have the cognitive skills? This is like the intellectual capacity or the intellectual skills needed to fulfill the role. And then the habits. If we want someone that is going to regularly go and hunt for new business, we want to make sure we're hiring someone that has already built the habit of regularly hunting for new business. So first thing is have a hiring process that is based around those search criteria. Number 2.
Can I just interrupt you?
Yeah.
Politely, Tom, if
Interrupt
I may.
away.
So what I see is a lot of organizations that hire for skills and experience, and they fire for attitude, cognitive ability, and habits. So you're missing out, some of that search criteria. And if you don't do that, you're going to find out when they start, when it's too late, that they haven't got the right attitude, ability to learn, or the right prospecting behavior to be successful.
Yeah, absolutely. Really, really good point.
Sorry. Tip 2, please, Tom.
Tip 2. So tip 2 is we've got to have a structured onboarding plan. And in some ways, we can think of the onboarding process as a last resort double check on our hiring decision. First and foremost, though, the onboarding plan is to make sure that the people we've just hired get a great start, get up to speed quickly. And the onboarding plan needs to document what should people be able to do by when within their initial probation window. So in a sales context, this might mean, just for example, right, by the end of the first week, they need to be able to coherently explain what the company does in a way that they might to a new potential customer. They need to be able to give a good elevator pitch, or what we call a 30-second commercial. Maybe by the end of the first month, they need to have provided evidence that they have reached out to and had initial conversations with 5 on-profile prospects. Doesn't really matter what it is. What matters is that we're clear on what behaviors, what testable actions we need to have seen to know that this person is on track to do well and we've made a really good decision.
Brilliant. Would you almost describe that like a kind of cookbook, and the key ingredients that are needed for them to be successful in the role? This is the cookbook. This is what you need to do.
Yeah, absolutely. So cookbook is like a recipe for success. It's a recipe for sales success because it documents what types of activity need to happen and then what the quantities of each of those activities are. So at a very simple level, it could be 10 phone calls a day to these kind of people, 2 networking events a week, 1 trade show a month, an X number of LinkedIn posts or messages. Importantly, we need to tell people during the interview process, this is the cookbook you're going to be asked to follow. This is the expectation. Are we going to have any problem with that? Are we going to have any issue with doing that kind of level of activity? Because it's much better that we have a discussion about it early than it is what typically happens is the manager says to the salesperson 2 months into their new job, why aren't you doing these activities? And now we've got a problem.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Tom. Good, excellent. And then tip 3.
Tip number 3, as mentioned, we've got to have a process and methodology for selling. We should have a documented structure for our sales activity. Hey, new salesperson, this is how we sell around here. And this is why. First, we do this, let's say an initial phone call. Then we figure out if that person wants to visit our factory. The second meeting happens in this way, and we're expecting them to take a decision about spending X amount for this kind of product or service. We've got to be able to spell that out. And then, of course, at every stage in that process, we can have a methodology that guides what we say and do, and we can now help our salespeople be good at it. As sales managers, then we need to be able to train, coach, mentor, and hold people accountable for doing each of those bits in the process effectively.
Brilliant. Fantastic, Tom. 3 fantastic tips there to help create a high-performing function. Make sure you use the search criteria so that you hire the right people and disqualify the wrong people. Onboarding plan and cookbook for success. And then the structured process and methodology, make sure that is a documented way of selling. In your experience, Tom, of all the organizations you've worked with, how many organizations are doing any of those?
Generally speaking, not many. That's often the reason we start working with them. What often happens is they're kind of doing a bit of some of those areas, but it's just a bit vague.
That's it. If I may interrupt, Lee, we've had a really good question. I think this is a really good time to bring it up, if I may. So Mark has said, understanding process and competence is very well in the context of energy sales, but can he ask what you think about the concept that people buy from people, please? Well, Tom,
so shall I take a stab at that? So that is a great question, Mark. So my take on this is the following. We know that the ability to build rapport and build relationships is an important component in sales. So my question to a professional salesperson would be, okay, relationships are important. What are your strategies and tactics for building strong relationships with the people that you speak to? And my experience is that many professional salespeople cannot answer that question. They can say, well, I kind of talk about the weather and the football. But that's not a strategy or a tactic. What I want to hear is clear strategies and tactics that allow that salesperson to have a better chance of creating an environment of trust and a strong enough relationship that the person is comfortable advancing along the sales process.
Fantastic. I think that's a great answer.
Yeah, and just on that, I think there's this misconception that it's only extrovert salespeople that are any good at sales, and yeah, that might be very good at them opening the door and building relationships, but do they actually sell anything? Actually, some of the best salespeople that I've ever met, and I'm talking about people that exceed their target every year for 20 years running, are introverted sales leaders because they listen, 2 ears and 1 mouth in that order. And And those are the ones that are successful because they've got a structured sales process and methodology.
Yeah. What I really want to hear from a sales professional is, this is how I slightly change what I do to deal with and build rapport with really detail focused people. This is what I do to slightly change my process to build rapport with big picture action focused people. This is what I do to really slightly change my process to deal with slower paced, more introverted, relationship focused people. And I want them to be able to articulate what little things they might change, different questions that they might ask, different statements they might make, or different actions they might take to effectively match and mirror the communication style of the person that they're selling to.
Great tip. I'd also add, you want to hire the best sales leader that you can get, not just any sales leader, because if you don't get it right from the top, how can you expect those reporting in to succeed?
Yes.
And then here's the other thing, Tom, good talent attracts good talent.
Yeah, absolutely.
Talent, they won't want to work for people that are mediocre.
No, absolutely. I really love that expression. Better a team of sheep led by a lion than a team of lions led by a sheep. Getting the sales manager, sales leader role right is really crucial. So we would always advocate, hire slow, fire fast. The cost of a bad hire is huge when you factor in all the recruiting costs, the management time, all the incidental costs that come with filling a role. It can be a lot if you get the wrong person. So it is worth taking time and investing extra to get the right fit.
And I think that leads really nicely, Lee, into our final question.
Well, it does, Kirsty. So, yeah, the recruitment process is often where it goes wrong. And as we've explained, if you hire the wrong person, it doesn't matter how good your sales methodology or your playbook is. They're just not going to be successful. So what can we do to avoid hiring the wrong people, Tom?
So it's pretty simple. I believe most sales hiring interview processes are based on subjective criteria. I kind of like them. I think they'll do a good job. They seem to know what they're talking about. We got to make sure we have objective criteria in our process. Testable, pass or fail criteria.
Yep.
It's said to do this in the application. Did they do it? Yes or no? Yes, they move to the next stage. No, they're out. So we've got to break down the roles and responsibilities of the job function we're looking to recruit for into testable criteria.
Brilliant. Excellent.
And that strips away too much subjective gut feel. It's okay to have a bit of that, but we've got to have some objective criteria to balance it out.
Would you also advise having a diverse interview panel, people that perhaps come from different functions or in different grades? Because I've seen people, I've done this myself in the past, you fall in love with the candidates, and then that just masks all rationality and objectivity, and then perhaps having someone else come in with a second viewpoint.
Yeah, so I would put this in the category, or one category this might fall into is, we want to make sure we got a good culture fit, and we want to make sure, as you said, we're not kidding ourselves. We haven't fallen in love with the candidate and that typically happens if we've got a recruitment process that's too based on subjective criteria. So what we want to do, just like in sales, we want to filter out early people that are unlikely to buy anything so that we can put our time, effort, and energy into potential customers that there's a reasonable chance they might buy something. We want to, in our hiring, filter out early people that just do not have the capabilities to do the job.
Brilliant.
We want to get rid of those so that we're only interviewing and investing time, effort, and energy with people that could do a good job. And now we're just picking the very best of the bunch, the people that are the best culture fit and the people that are likely to just knock it out of the park. We want to filter out the people that are not likely to do that before we waste any time getting to know them and thinking that we might like them.
Okay. Energy is very technical and very complex. You see lots of operational, technical, analytical type people. It's not a wash in general with great salespeople. What's your view on perhaps hiring out of sector if they tick all the other boxes?
I think that's a great opportunity. We have seen in many, many situations people from operations that make great sales managers because they have an objective, process-driven approach to managing and helping salespeople. We've seen that work really well, very, very, very often. So I think that can be a fantastic thing to do, and it is a lot easier when you have a documented sales process and methodology, because now we know what we're doing, and it's not all of this kind of charisma and persuasion stuff that is very hard to replicate and scale.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
all goes back to documented process.
Okay, Lee, I think unfortunately it goes really quick. We've come to the end of our time now. So in a second, I'm going to do a quick summary and then we're going to come to Tom for the top tip, which you can do if you want to hire great salespeople. But before then, Lee, can we talk about our next show, which I believe is on the 13th of March, where we have a really talented guy, someone who really knows his stuff, don't we?
Yeah, it's everyone's favourite Cornish Indian, Kirsty. It's me.
It's fantastic. And what it ties in really nicely with today's show, I think, Lee, the topic.
It does. Now, get this, Kirsty. From research we conducted, over half of executive hiring managers haven't had any interview training. You know, this is crazy when, as Tom said earlier, the cost of a bad hire at any level can be 3 to 5 times someone's salary in terms of impact on the business, missed opportunities. So I'm going to share how you can create a robust interview process. We also use the search methodology, so I'll go into far greater detail that can help our audience and viewers reduce the risk of making these costly bad hires.
Oh, I'm very much looking forward to that. I think it's going to be a great show. And that, again, is on the 13th of March. But let's round up this show first. So, Tom, if I may do a summary, because there's been a lot of really good information that's come out today. So I think when people think about finding salespeople, why it's so hard, you made a really good point. You have sort of two desperate people, these desperate salesmen who want more money or a job if they haven't got one, and the hiring manager who just wants to not do it themselves and fill this thing. And so perhaps they overlook the flaws of one another and end up in an unsuited situation. Add into that they don't have a structured process for sales, and it becomes really obvious that you're kind of playing an odds game here and it's not the way that we want it to be. So in order for that to function properly, you want to have various things I'll talk about in a second, but you want a structure, a process, and a methodology. You want to make sure that people understand what they're doing and why they're doing it and how they're going to get from A into B. And some of the tips that you gave us around it is make sure you have a hiring process based around the search criteria. And Lee's going to go into that more next time. But essentially that was skills, experience, which is what most people focus on, but they kind of ignore attitude, results, their cognitive ability, and their habits. And all of that ties into making someone who's really strong. Add into that you should add in a structured onboarding plan so that people know exactly what they've got to do in the timeframes they're supposed to do it. That is also mentioned during the interview process, so people really know what to expect. No one's surprised. There's no surprise, panic, and blame halfway through. And you should, if you do have made a mistake, it happens earlier. You can recognize it earlier. And finally, again, that process and methodology for selling. This is how we sell. If you're coming here, this is the way we work. If you don't like it, perhaps someone else will be a better suited model for you. And then the thing I really liked, I think my favorite thing that I took from today was having this objective as well as subjective criteria for hiring decisions. You know, sometimes you see someone and you think, well, they're a great guy. Well, of course they are. Probably the best thing they are at selling is themselves. But then there's no real proof that they've sold anything else. So having in there some objective things, some things that you can break down what you expect of them into, have you done this, yes or no? Perhaps even getting other people from the business in there to offer more objective kind of tasks for them. It's not just within the sales function as well. So how was that for a summary of what we've spoken about, Tom?
I think it was a great summary. Thank you.
Yes.
Good job, Kirsty. Let me just squeeze in there one quick question. Tom, if you were to give viewers one final tip, what would it be?
So this is very simple. It's what I call the rule of 3. This applies to managers, hiring, salespeople themselves. Think about the objections, problems, stalls that you've had. if you've had an objection once, so what? Stuff happens. Twice, it's a coincidence. 3, it's a pattern. We know that this problem, stall, or objection is going to happen over and over again, and we need a great response, something that we can bring up early in the process that puts us in control of figuring out if this is a roadblock that's insurmountable or whether it's something that can be worked through. So think about all those problems you've had in your hiring process and come up with a great solution. What's the way round that problem? Most of the time, they don't spend any time planning that out in advance, so we're constantly firefighting.
The playbook, rebuttals to common objections.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Brilliant. Tom, do you provide business owners with sales leadership and management training? If anyone wants to get in touch, how should they go about that?
So the easiest way is to drop me a message or connection request on LinkedIn. It's LinkedIn at Tom Mallens. So Mallens. Drop me a message or connection request. It would be great to hear from you.
Fantastic. Tom, this has been a brilliant show. I'd like to thank you for all of your expert tips. Thank you, Kirsty, for excelling as always as MC. And I'd like to thank you, thanks to our audience for watching. See you next time.